The United States is the most powerful country in human history, with over 800 military bases and 37% of global military spending. The US has become the leader of a vast, interconnected global system that has helped usher in an era of unprecedented prosperity and low levels of conflict. To understand America's position in the world, and why it's so pivotal for world politics as we know it, you have to go back to the country's founding, back to when America wasn't a global power in any sense of the word. During the first 70 years of its existence, the United States expanded in both territory and influence in North America, eventually reaching the Pacific Ocean, in a wave of expansionism that resulted in the wholesale slaughter of the indigenous people who populated the continent.
Hold up. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, by Hashem Yahushai, by Hashem Rakar Kadash. Double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone who rule well. Much respect to the brothers laboring in this truth and sincerity worldwide, trying to wake up the elect of the children of Israel. And this video came on one of my recommended, and I watched it, man, and the spirit hit me to do a lesson, man. And I'm gonna call this lesson the rise and fall of Babylon, right? So what we just seen is how the Edomites came over here, raped, robbed, and murdered, and took over all the land, right? So this is Numbers chapter 35 and verse 33. And it reads, so ye shall not pollute the land wherein ye are, for blood defileth the land, and the land cannot be cleansed of the blood that is shed therein, but by the blood of him that shed it, right?
But early Americans were deeply divided as to whether the country should expand to the Pacific Ocean, in a wave of expansionism that resulted in the wholesale slaughter of the indigenous people who populated the continent.
Wholesale slaughter, right? Damn devils. It's the book of Micah. Chapter 2. Verse 1. Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When the morning is light, they practice it because it is in the power of their hands. They covet fields and take them by violence, and houses and take them away. So they oppress a man and his house, a man and his heritage. Therefore thus saith the Most High Power, behold, against this family do I devise an evil, from which ye shall not remove your necks, neither shall ye go haughtily, for this time is evil. And in that day, saith one, and in that day shall one take up a parable against you, and lament with the doleful lamentation, and say, we be utterly spoiled. He have changed the portion of my people. How have he removed it from me? Turning away, he have divided our fields, right? And that's what's coming to Esau, right? The rise and fall of Babylon.
Early Americans were deeply divided as to whether the country should expand beyond the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. This became a major debate after the Civil War, when some leaders, like post-war Secretary of State Seward, argued that America should push to become a global power. Seward succeeded in pushing a plan to purchase Alaska from Russia, but his attempts to buy Greenland and Iceland, as well as annex territory in the Caribbean, were all blocked by Congress.
Hold up, didn't Trump just try and buy Greenland again, man? Didn't he just ask about the purchase of Greenland again, right?
That's because some Americans, including many on Capitol Hill, had a strong anti-imperialist bent. These people worried about America getting more involved in global politics, as well as having to integrate populations from quote-unquote inferior races.
Hold up. Inferior races. This is Deuteronomy chapter 14 and verse 2. And it reads, For thou art an holy people unto Yahweh by Hashem Yahushai, and the Most High have chosen thee to be a peculiar people unto himself above all nations that are upon earth, right? So the Israelites are not a base people, man. You Edomites are the base people, man. Right?
And this opposition implied major checks on the imperialist urge to expand. But something was happening in the late 1800s that would change the debate about American expansionism. The Industrial Revolution produced explosive economic growth, and the bigger U.S. economy required a more centralized state and bureaucracy to manage the growing economy. Power became concentrated in the federal government, making it easier for expansionist presidents, like William McKinley, to unilaterally push American influence abroad. The key turning point came in 1890.
He said unilaterally push American influence abroad, right? This is Habakkuk chapter 2. These devils came into power by rape, rob, and murder, man, and that's how they're going to be taken out, right? This is Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 4. Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. Yea, also, because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied. But gather unto him all nations, and heap unto him all peoples. Shall not all these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, Woe to him that increaseth that which is not his? How long to him that ladeth himself with thick clay, right? Shall they not rise up suddenly that shall bite thee, and awake that shall vex thee, and thou shalt be booties unto them, right?
1998, when President McKinley dragged the country into war with Spain over Cuba, despite some intense domestic opposition. The rising United States easily defeated the moribund Spanish Empire, acquiring Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines in the process. Over the next 2 years, the U.S. would annex the Kingdom of Hawaii, Wake Island, and American Samoa. A few years later,
how the hell you gonna annex something that ain't yours? Let me read this again. This is the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2 and verse 6. Salakia. Yes, verse 6. Shall not all these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, Woe to him that increaseth that which is not his? How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay?
The U.S. took control of the Panama Canal Zone and sent troops to occupy the Dominican Republic. It also purchased the American Virgin Islands. This period of rapid acquisition of far-flung territories put the U.S. on the map as a truly global power. During this time, America also began using its influence to protect its growing commercial and military interests abroad, installing pro-American regimes in places like Nicaragua, and playing a major role in international diplomacy regarding the Western presence in China. World War I showed just how much America's influence had grown. Not only was American intervention a decisive factor in the war's end, but President Wilson attended the Paris Peace Conference, which ended the war, and attempted to set the terms of the peace. He spearheaded America's most ambitious foreign policy initiative yet, an international organization called the League of Nations, designed to promote peace and cooperation globally. The League, a whole...
There's no peace to the wicked, right? It's the book of Isaiah, chapter 48 and verse 22. There is no peace, saith the Most High, unto the wicked, right? So you devils, man, we're not going to let you rest, man. We're going to expose your wickedness daily, right? This is Habakkuk, chapter 2 and verse 12. Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, and establish a city by iniquity. Behold, it is not of the Most High of hosts. So like it. Behold, is it not of Yahweh Shai of hosts, that the people shall labor in the very fire, and the people shall weary themselves for weary vanity? For the earth have lifted, Shalakia, for the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Most High, as the waters cover the sea. Woe to him that giveth his neighbor drink, and putteth thy bottle to him, and makest him drunken also, that thou mayest look upon their nakedness. Right? So this is what Esau did. He started this back from World War One, man. How he tried to set up all these different things to have the nations drunk with the wine of his fornication, right?
Wholesale effort to remake global politics showed just how ambitious American foreign policy had become. Yet isolationism was still a major force in the United States. Congress blocked the United States from joining the League of Nations, dooming Wilson's project. During the Great Depression and the rise of Hitler, the US was much more focused on its own region than on European affairs. Ultimately, America's ever-growing entanglements abroad made it impossible for it to stay out of global affairs entirely. In East Asia, the growing Japanese Empire posed a direct threat to American possessions and troops, bringing the United States and Japan into conflict. This culminated in the Pearl Harbor attack, bringing the United States into war.
Now, if you really look into this, man, during that whole period of time, the United States wanted to get into the war, right? Because if you look at the history of the United States, I think it's like 2 years after the whole country being established, it hasn't been at war in some part of the world. But when you look into the history of what occurred between Japan and the United States, guess how the United States did it? They first started giving 11 tariffs against Japan to rouse them up to get them to initiate a war. The same game plan is going on right now.
World War II. World War II would transform America's global presence forever. The United States was the only major power to avoid economic ruin during the war, and it was the sole country equipped with atomic weapons. As such, it was in a unique position to set the terms of the peace, and, with the aim of preventing another war in mind, it took advantage. The most famous example of this is the creation of the United Nations. The UN Charter set up a system of international law prohibiting wars of conquest, like the ones waged by the Nazis and the Japanese.
Hold up, man. A war of conquest, right? So you devils can conquest and take away land that wasn't yours, and then you set terms, right? This is Revelation chapter 17 and verse 1. And then there came one of the 7 angels, which had 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, and I will show unto you the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication, right? Jump down to verse 11. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7th that goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength to the beast, right?
It also served as a forum in which the international community could weigh in on disputes and help resolve them. This way, the Americans hoped, great powers could resolve their differences through compromise and law rather than war. But while the UN is the most famous of the post-war institutions, it isn't the only one. 730 delegates from all 44 allied nations came together in a small vacation haven in New Hampshire. Their goal? To establish a global financial system that would prevent another Great Depression and World War. The resulting agreement, called the Bretton Woods Agreement, ultimately became the backbone of the global financial system, resulting in the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. By creating these institutions, the United States committed itself to being deeply involved in the world's problems. The issue, though, is that the world's second largest power, the Soviet Union, saw things differently. World War II had made allies out of the democratic West and communist East in the fight against Hitler, but that couldn't last. The United States saw Soviet expansion in Eastern Europe and elsewhere as a direct threat to its vision of a free-trading, democratic world.
To a substantial degree, in one form or another, socialism has spread the shadow of human regimentation over most of the nations of the earth, and the shadow is encroaching upon our own liberty.
Fearful.
Guess what? That's God, man. And may God is going to destroy this place pretty soon with the fall of Babylon coming up, right?
Of Soviet intentions towards Western Europe, the US and other European nations created the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance meant to stop Russia from invading other countries in Europe.
As we know, the beast is NATO, right?
Globally, the US committed to a strategy called containment, so called because it was aimed at containing the spread of communism everywhere on the globe. This new global struggle meant that the US had to exert influence everywhere, all the time. Instead of disbanding the massive military machine created for World War II, the wheels mostly kept turning. This had two main results. First, the US was pulled into unlikely alliances with countries like Saudi Arabia, Israel, and South Korea, seeing each of.
Let's go back.
Democratic West and Communist East in the fight against Hitler. The resulting agreement was a small vacation haven in New Hampshire. Their goal? To establish a global financial system that would prevent another Great Depression and World War. The resulting agreement, called the Bretton Woods Agreement, ultimately became the backbone of the global financial system, resulting in the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund.
The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, right? So all these countries are really tied together, man. And with Trump doing this this tariff, man, it's gonna cause the global economy to fall, man. Which in turn is gonna cause the RFID microchip. Which in turn gonna do what? Cause World War III. Right? Now I want to look up some information on the International Monetary Fund. Let's see if I can find something right quick. Alright, this is from 3 days ago. It's from The Guardian. It says the IMF is hurting countries it claims to help. When people think of the damage that wealthy countries typically led by the U.S. and its allies cause to people in the rest of the world, they probably think of warfare. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis died from the 2003 invasion, and then many more as the region became inflamed. But rich companies also have considerable powers over the lives of billions of people through their control over institutions of global governance. One of these is the International Monetary Fund. It has 189 member countries, but the U.S. and the rich allies have a solid majority of votes. Hey, man, that's your beast, man, right? With the whore, right? And the head of the IMF is by custom of your Slakia. The head of the IMF is by custom a European, and the U.S. has enough votes to veto many major decisions by itself. Although the rich countries almost never vote against each other, right? Wow, that's crazy. All right, let's see. To see what the problem looks like, consider a recent IMF loan in March. Ecuador, the place is on that part of the rainforest is on fire right now. In March, Ecuador signed an agreement to borrow $4.2 billion from the IMF over 3 years, provided that the government will adhere to certain economic programs spelled out in the arrangement. In the words of Christine Lagarde, then the IMF chief, this was a comprehensive reform program aimed at modernizing the economy and paving the way for strong, sustained, and equitable growth. But is it? The program calls for a numerous tightening of the country's national budget, about 6% of the GDP over the next 3 years. For comparison, imagine tightening the U.S. federal budget by $1.4 trillion through some combination of cutting spending and raising taxes. In Ecuador, this will include firing tens of thousands of public sector employees, raising taxes that fall disproportionately on the poor, and making cuts to public investment, right? This article is from 3 days ago. The overall impact of this large fiscal tightening will be to push the economy into recession. The IMF projections are for a relative mild recession until next year, but it will likely be much deeper and longer, as often happens with the IMF programs, right? Unemployment will rise. Even the IMF program projections acknowledge that, and so will poverty. Man, you see what these devils do, man? They man, wow.
By creating these institutions, the United States committed itself to being deeply involved in the world's problems. The issue, though, is that
deeply causing the world's problems.
The world's second largest power, the Soviet Union, saw things differently. World War II had made allies out of the democratic West and communist East in the fight against Hitler, but that couldn't last. The United States saw Soviet expansion in Eastern Europe and elsewhere as a direct threat to its vision of a free trading, democratic world.
To a substantial degree, in one form or another, socialism has spread the shadow of human regimentation over most of the nations of the earth, and the shadow is encroaching upon our own liberty.
Fearful of Soviet intentions towards Western Europe, the US and other European nations created the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance meant to stop Russia from invading other countries in Europe. Globally, the US committed to a strategy called containment, so called because it was aimed at containing the spread of communism everywhere on the globe. This new global struggle meant that the US had to exert influence everywhere, all the time. Instead of disbanding the massive military machine created for World War II, the wheels mostly kept turning. This had two main results. First, the US was pulled into unlikely alliances with countries like Saudi Arabia, Israel, and South Korea, seeing each of them as bulwarks against communist influence in their region. Secondly, the US began intervening, often secretly, in dozens of countries to contain Soviet influence.
So these devils went secretly in these countries causing coups, man. Causing death and destruction, man. Let me get this. Right? Man. Yahweh Radazah, please take these folks on out the way. This is what I want. Salakia. Okay. This is the book of Psalms, chapter 75, and verse 7. For Yahweh is the judge, he putteth down one and setteth up another. For in the hand of Yahweh Hashem Yahushua there is a cup, and the wine is red. It is full of mixture, and he pours out of the same. But the dregs thereof, all the wicked of the earth, shall wring them out and drink them. But I will declare forever, I will sing the praises of Yahweh Hashem Yahushua of Jacob, right? And all the horns of the wicked also will I cut off, and all the horns of the righteous shall be exalted. So that's what we looking forward to, man. Cutting off this damn...
Sometimes this meant propping up sympathetic dictators, like in Iran. Other times, it meant supplying rebels with arms and money, like in Afghanistan in 1979 and Nicaragua in 1985. Over the course of the Cold War, the U.S. intervened in hundreds of disputes around the globe, ending up with a complicated set of alliances, tensions, and relationships in basically every corner of the earth.
This is Revelation. Chapter 17. And verse 14. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. Right? Let's see. Verse 16. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast shall make the whore desolate. Shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. Right? For Yahweh Hashem Yahushua have put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and to give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of Yahweh Hashem Yahushua shall be fulfilled, right? And it's getting fulfilled right now, man. Brothers out there prophesying week in and week out, putting up these video epistles, exposing the wickedness of Esau, Edom, the Idumeans, the curse of the Most High, that wicked vessel, that man of perdition, right?
After the Berlin Wall fell, the U.S. could have withdrawn from the system, severing ties with its allies and drawing down the size of its military. And while the U.S. did decrease military spending, much of the military infrastructure and alliances from the Cold War remained. Presidents George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton decided that it was in both America and the world's interests for the United States, now the sole superpower on Earth, to continue actively managing global affairs.
We should be, and we...
How these devils gonna actively manage global affairs, and you can't even manage the affairs in your own backyard, man?
must be peacemakers.
NATO, created solely as a tool for countering the Soviet Union, stayed together and even expanded, a way of keeping European nations united in the absence of the Soviet threat. Washington's support for countries like Israel and Japan stayed intact, ostensibly as a means of preventing war in their respective regions. The global system of alliances and institutions created to keep the peace during the Cold War became permanent, as did the American military and political commitments necessary to keep them running. This system remains in operation today, and no leading American politician since the Cold War has seriously called for dismantling it. Except, perhaps, for Donald Trump. Trump has said contradictory things about these commitments, but he's consistently argued that American allies are not paying the US enough for its protection, and questioned the value of free trade. That calls NATO and even the World Trade Organization into question.
At some point, we have to say, you know what, we're better off if Japan protects itself against this maniac.
And that's why we like Donald Trump, because the Most High to put the top-ranked devil in position to end this bitch, right? Call Lord Yahweh Hashem.
In North Korea, we're better off, frankly, if South Korea is going to start to protect itself.
Saudi Arabia, nuclear weapons?
Saudi Arabia, absolutely.
This is a sharp divergence from the consensus that has dominated US foreign policy since 1945, and something closer to the isolationism that came before it. So will President Trump act on some of Canada Trump's ideas and reverse decades worth of institution building and alliances? We'll find out soon enough.